Hello, Abnormal. Got another drop for you guys today. I hope you enjoy this one. It was late April. For the first time that year, the temperature began to warm, and I was wanting to get some nice, quiet hiking in as early as possible before the trails became crowded and dusty in the dry summer heat. We knew there'd be no modest amount of snow still up on the mountain, but figured the trails would be easy enough to follow regardless. And it's not if I had never minded getting a little wet at the ankles anyway. As we came up on the base of the hood, we could see the fresh streaks cut, winding down through the powder, where the skiers were still enjoying the last few weeks of their fun. We drove past the trailhead and went further up the road to Government Camp to grab a bite to eat, and have a beer or two before the hike. Being as it was weekday, the place was mostly cleared out, aside from the handful of business skeleton crews and the sparse local or off-duty park ranger. We ate at Charlie's Mountain View, a decent place to eat, a drink, by the way, and managed to get a little buzzed with 2 or 3 shots of whiskey. The spirit would keep us warm out in the snow. We paid and looped back out of town and toward our hiking destination. We were originally planning to go see the Tominawas Falls, but at the very end of that trail, before coming up on the falls themselves, is a stretch of just brittle shell that's still hard to pass, though, or around the snow without crampons. Even the trail we did pick would prove to be somewhat difficult without them. The car veered into the patch of well-tread snow that vaguely resembled a parking lot. There were only 2 other cars in the space. It's a rare treat to have such a beautiful, fine, usually very busy trail all to yourself. So I was giddily with joy. It didn't take very long at all to realize we may have gotten in over our heads. Literally. The way was slippery, the dirt was obscured of a sheet of firmly packed, trodden ice, too stubborn to have melted yet. Off the trail, the snow was powdery and varied in depths of 3 to 5 feet. I was relieved that the trail, despite being under so much packed snow, was still easy enough to discern. I've spent enough time on this forum to know the possible consequences of wading off trail to the bushwhack out of the wilderness, and I'm just not that kind of guy to do that to myself, even for the sake of adventure. The first, and certainly not last, of our trails appeared early on in the form of a 10-foot long footbridge. Because ice will remain on a bridge much longer than on the ground, the 4-foot tall side rails were easily overtaken by treacherous slick ice. I thank God that I remembered to put on layers, because the only way across without running the risk of falling into the undoubtedly freezing cold water of the creek below was to crawl across on all fours. Both hands and feet necessarily would be adequate. There were probably a dozen bridges at the start of the trail, so my knees were plenty cold once we hit the upward stride. But I had the wise foresight to carry along a pair of flasks full of Fireball, so we couldn't have cared less once enough that we got coursing around in our veins. Once midday hit, it actually started to get a little warm. Then I took off my jacket to soak up the snow-kissed breeze that moved in slow rushes through the forest. The calm and quiet felt tangible, something to separate from the perpetual traffic, the hum of civilization. The quiet, as the later discarded, was only a cascade, something more sinister. Things started getting interesting as we began to climb our way up to the switchbacks that crisscrossed up the mountain to take to the lake. We managed to get up easily enough, but the going was slow. I fell down only once and slid down a good 20 or 30 feet backwards on the ice. Only a tree was able to stop the momentum. The trail and the lake at its end got its name due to the fact that in the summer Mount Hood will reflect off its waters perfectly, and mirror as it were. But now the whole lake was just a stark white plain overlooked by the mountains. The trail stopped at the trees where the courageous hikers decided not to go anywhere. Near the lake, we were not as wise. We stuck close to the tree line, the only real way to discern the lake from the shore. I stepped into a shallow puddle, but it wasn't a big deal since my feet were already plenty soaked. After getting a few good photos with the mountains in the background, we found a nice tree to crawl up into and rest our feet and warm up. There was enough daylight to finish off the cinnamon whiskey and read a little before heading home. We had planned to take an adjacent path to the other places where sightseeing, but the trek had already taken so long that we would have ended up hiking partially through the dark. The trail was impossible to find for all the snow coverage. I made a comment about how we never did see any other hikers out there despite the 2 cars in the parking lot, but shrugged my shoulders about it and carried on. Through the parking lot bus. We traced our footprints back to where we came from, lunging over the puddle that got the better of me earlier. Going down was much faster than going up, and it made some good time getting to the base of the climb. I was in a rush to get home, get warm, and take a shower, so I had some of the sliding down the slopes on my butt. After coming down off the steep inclines, the trail leads through a much flatter area that took us all the way back to the parking lot. It winds through and around the trees and boulders, passing by an occasional meadow. As soon as we got to the flat part of the trail, we started to hear the crying. It was really quiet at first, and I thought it was just some bird. No kind of bird I'd ever heard. Very gradually it got louder. Discomfort grew between us until the final piece of the realization puzzle fell into place, and I knew that it must have been a person, a man, just sobbing loudly somewhere far off the trail. I was racking my brain trying to figure out how and why in the hell anybody in their right mind would go out there in all that snow, when the trail was hard enough to find when you were standing on it. I instinctively knew the answer to the question already. I knew instinctively that something was very off about the fact that someone was crying out in the woods alone. Off about even in the timbre of the voice. In some way I couldn't quite place it. I couldn't even admit to myself in that moment something was very, very wrong. I asked my girlfriend to affirm what I was hearing, what I thought I was hearing, and she did say that it sounded exactly like an adult man crying out there where we couldn't see. So I yelled, "Hello, do you need help?" And it just went dead quiet. The crying stopped, everything stopped, and then I realized that there had been no sound for quite a while. Only the man crying somewhere deeper in the woods. It wasn't a pure vacuum of sound, more like nature was invading us, making the radius of our existence a void, as if we would be suddenly been placed under unseen eyes, that the birds and chipmunks, air itself knew well to avoid. Everything was dead quiet now. After the skittering of footfalls and some squirrels trailed off in a hurry, we were left only to the soft breeze whistling through the trees in the distance as uneasy company. "Call out again," my girlfriend said. Disquiet was building, and I knew something was very wrong. I said, "No, let's go. We'll call the nearest ranger station when we have service." We started walking again. The tension went unspoken as I was nervous, and I knew she was just as nervous because without having said anything, she was walking much faster than before. Her stride, once cautious because of the ice, had become carelessly rushed. We had made it perhaps another quarter of a mile when we started to hear the crying again. It was quiet, far behind us. I was already cold as hell, but hearing that voice again made my blood turn twice as cold in my veins. Muscles twitched in preparation for immediate flight away from the danger. I took glances back every few yards as the whining very gradually began to get louder and closer. I began to hear other things totally out of place, twigs snapping, snow crunching under light, stilted footsteps. When it sounded like it was maybe just 10 yards behind us, we both darted and looked back. I'll never forget what I saw. It will never not be seared into my mind. The most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. I couldn't get a full picture of him because it was hiding behind a tree. It was a man that must have stood 8 or 9 feet off the ground. Naked and covered in pus, bruises, and cuts kissed the frost. It had long hair and the beard of a thin layer of whippy fuzz that laid mangy-looking patches over its gray, pallid flesh. It was staring directly into my eyes, pupils milky with cataracts. It opened its mouth in a childlike, exaggerated yawn to make that crying sound again, only and more guttural. Its teeth looked like they had been chewed down to dull yellow nubs. I was caught in the awestruck trance, transfixed by the impossible of what I was seeing, until it was so unnaturally long. stride, it stepped out from behind a tree toward us, crying eagerly, gnashing its rotten maw with tongue thrashing around in the cavern of its mouth. I didn't get a great look at him in his full glory because I grabbed my girlfriend's coat sleeve and dragged her down the trail, sprinting like I never ran before. All the way back to the car, we cleared the treacherous bridges in single leaps, miraculously not falling. I could hear the thing only a few yards behind us, its stomps vibrating the earth below. We could have died or suffered some other imaginably grim fate if the monster hadn't taken a misstep on one of the icy bridges. I heard him slip and fall into the water below. It wasn't deep enough to really deter such a huge thing, but it was just enough to give us a good lead. We made it to the car safely. I almost tore the door handle off trying to open it before my girlfriend could fish the keys out of her backpack. Tires squealed to the traction against the ice, and we begged and begged until the car finally caught and lurched forward out of the lot. Driving was dangerous because of how much I was shaking. The face of the monster inciting panic any time I'd think of those eyes and the face that thing made when it cried at us. This was one of the most scariest encounters we had ever had. We will never go back to that place again. I have no idea what this thing was, but I have no doubt that it was trying to lure us to it by using these cries. And now I think when I lay in bed at night, what if my wife and I would have went to the cries? What if we had went further into the deeper snow where we would have been slower and it could have caught us? Is this what it was trying to do? Was it trying to get us in the deeper snow where we were slower? Was it an older one that was having trouble hunting, so it had set the trap for us? Was it actually going to kill and eat us? Would we have been the next victims in a national park? We have not been to any more national parks since this has happened, and we wanted to share this with everyone so they would know. If you hear something crying in the dark, don't go looking for it. Just leave and call for help. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I've heard cries in the forest myself and was almost lured in myself to go look. So I would agree with him. If you hear crying, don't go look at it. I would leave and call for help. Thanks for watching, guys. Until next time, keep your head on a swivel and don't be something's dinner.